This just in. Hunters have been nerfed. Ret Paladins have been buffed. Welcome back to Marcelian&Flame. In this week's episode of Is Your Main Safe to Play in 11.2? Spoiler alert, everything is safe to play. We will be looking at the class tuning balance made to kind of just see exactly where our characters are going to be at the start of Season 3 and how the meta might actually shape up. Currently, we're in the last week of the PTR update with the patch releasing in just a couple of days, and the balance looks decently and better each time. It's likely that this might not be the last tuning, but if it is, this is how your class is going to look like next week when the patch hits. Now let's start it off as always with Death Knight, particularly Deathbringer Frost. Wave of Souls critical strikes now increase the Shadow Frost damage the target takes by 3% per stack, down from 5%. Swift and Painful now increases strength by 5% for 8 seconds when no enemies are struck by Soul Rupture, previously was 10%. Swift and Painful now causes Wave of Souls to be 50% more effective on its main target, previously was 100%, and Exterminate First Sight damage has been reduced by 15%. And Rider of the Apocalypse fixed an issue causing undeath to benefit only one Death Knight in a group with multiple Death Knights present. This is clearly trying to bridge the gap between Deathbringer and Rider of the Apocalypse, and I can probably speak for the majority of the DPS Death Knight when I say that Rider of the Apocalypse is the peak fantasy of Death Knights, particularly Death Knight Hero Talent, so we are all happy that you are making Rider better. Moving down to Sand Lane, Frenzied Bloodthirst now increases the damage of Death Coil by 4% per stack of Essence of the Blood Queen, was 8%. And the 2-set bonus now extends the duration of Virulent Plague on your main target by an additional 3 seconds. It was 4 seconds before, and the 4-set bonus now increases the damage of Infliction of Sorrow by 30%, previously was 35%. Clearly, this refers to Unholy when it comes to Sand Lane, and because if you've watched our meta prediction tier list, we've had Unholy pretty high because it was actually doing a lot of damage, so this is once again balancing that fact. For Blood, Bone Shield increases armor by 115% of strength, previously was 100%. To probably bridge the gap between Blood and the other tanks, because if there's a tank that falls behind more than any other tank, might be Blood at this point. Frost overall has had an all ability damage reduced by 3% and Obliterate damage reduced by 5%, while Unholy has had its Death Coil damage reduced by 20%. We're moving down to Demon Hunter. Vengeance, Deflecting Spikes now increases parry during Demon Spikes by 8%, previously was 10%. Again, trying to bridge the gap between the tanks and nerfing down some of the top performer ones. Moving to Druid, for Wildstalker hero talents, Vigorous Creepers causes Bloodseeker Vines to increase damage targets take from you by 6%, previously was 5%. This of course affects Feral. And for Feral as well, Sabertooth causes Ferocious Bite to increase damage taken from your bleeds and other periodic effects by 5% per combo. Previously was 3%. Wildstalker has been an underused hero talent for Feral for almost every Mythic Plus season, and I think it might have been decently good in raids in certain situations, but getting more bleed damage is something that probably all Ferals have been wishing for a long time. Evoker Flame Shaper Essence Bomb damage reduced by 30%, and the Scale Commander fixed an issue where sometimes the 2-set bonus squadron would not follow the Evoker's target. Cannot really talk too much about this. I can definitely say that Flame Shaper Devastation has been really strong, and since I've played mostly Chrono Warden Preservation, I cannot really talk about that side of things, but Essence Bomb damage being reduced, if we're talking about just Flame Shaper Devastation, it probably makes sense, but from what I understand, the community doesn't really feel that way, even though every Devastation case that I've seen has just been popping off. We'll see how it plays once the season launches. I actually want a Devastation season, please. Now, for Hunters, specifically Dark Ranger Marksmanship, Black Arrow damage reduced by 8%. I believe this has been the more performing hero talent for Marksmanship on the PTR, and that's great, but we haven't really seen Dark Ranger being played in any competitive, consistent manner, outside maybe some unique raid fights. So, similar to Rider of the Apocalypse or anything like that, I do want to see Dark Ranger Hunter pop off. Sentinel, the 2-set bonus has been updated. Aim shot damage bonus reduced to 10%, was 20%. So just more marksmanship nerfs, I guess. And for Beast Mastery, all damage dealt reduced by 3%. And for marksmanship again, the trick shot effectiveness reduced to 60%, previously was 75%. Hunter has been taken down a peg because it was actually probably the best DPS on the PTR servers at the moment by quite a bit compared to other specs. Now, the difference between Hunter and Frost Death Knight were smaller than the difference between these two and any other spec. So the fact that these are nerfed is fair, lets more room for other specs as well to shine. However, when was the last time that you've seen Hunter in the spotlight? So once again, sure. Fire Mage, for those hitters out there, the Sun Fury has been reduced. Meteorite damage reduced by 15%, and Arcane Phoenix area of effect spell damage reduced by 10%. On top of this, since we're at the chapter of Fire, all damage has been reduced by 3%, and Flame Strike damage reduced by 15%. Of course, as a Fire fan, I was happy to see the buffs. Now, I'm a little bit conflicted about the nerfs. It probably deserves some of its nerfs. I would be careful about nerfing Flame Strike a little bit too much. I know people don't like to play Flame Strike, which is again a little bit weird. It's Fire's AoE ability. Of course, they can change Flame Strike to be a little bit more fun to use by adding quality of life changes like the Earthquakes has had for Elemental Shaman, where it can just put Flame Strikes at your target location. I have to manually click the target. That just feels terrible sometimes. But reverting back to a pure Pyroblast usage of Fire Mage is also boring because I don't want to be a Shadow Priest. I don't want to do single target damage in AoE. And Arcane as well, resonance damage bonus has been reduced to 12%, previously was 15%. It feels like the nerfs for Arcane are slightly smaller, but then again, you can never really tell with Mage. Moving now to Monk, Conduit the Celestial's Mistweaver 4-set bonus, the haste has been reduced to 10%, previously was 15%. While for Windwalker, Heart of the Jade Serpent duration reduced to 4 seconds, previously was 8, and the haste was also reduced to 10%, previously was 15%. However, in response to this, all Windwalker damage has been increased by 8%. The Conduit of the Celestial tier set was obviously very strong for Windwalker, way stronger than the Shadow Pan was. So Windwalker baseline damage is being improved by 8%, kind of pushes Windwalker up, and then just not makes it rely so much on the Conduit tier set and just make it overall more balanced. I'm not sure if this necessarily means that overall Windwalker is doing way more damage, since the tier set seems to have some pretty hefty nerfs. But it's always good to see when things are balanced and you have more options, of course. Paladin, maybe the most changed class this week, has seen changes for Holy with Herald of the Sun. Eternal Flame healing increased by 15%. Sun's Avatar healing reduced by 40%. Downlight now radiates 5% of its healing onto nearby allies, was 8%. Second Sunrise now has a 100% chance to activate, was 15%, but no longer grants Holy Power from Holy Shock casts, and casts at 15% effectiveness was 30%. I feel like this is a nerf. Is it a nerf? We'll see. The 2-set bonus for the tier set increases downlight healing by 60%, previously was 30, so a buff to the tier set. And the 4-set increases Holy Power spenders by 30% during Solar Wrath, was 15%. So overall, Holy might not have changed very much. Maybe it skewed some of its baseline power into the tier set, which I guess that's great, but haven't really felt like Holy Paladin fundamentally was just really, really good. It's fine. I've played it. It seems to do quite a bit of healing. It's really decent to play. So I guess this is all good. For Red, for Herald of the Sun, Sun's Seer damage has been increased by 100%. I think Reds pretty much have been playing Templar almost exclusively for the past 2 seasons. So seeing Herald of the Sun buffs for Red is really good, but that's not all, because Red also gets Divine Storm damage increased by 10%, Wake of Ashes damage increased by 10%, Seething Flames damage increased by 20%, and Truth's Wake damage increased by 20%. Fixed an issue causing Wake of Ashes to not benefit from Avenging Wrath when it activates Radiant Glory. As much as people like to criticize Red for always being strong, always being popular, always being everywhere, Red has been doing very poorly on the PTR for the last couple of weeks, and we've seen buffs last week, and now we're seeing buffs this week as well, so it's all really good. We want Red to be strong. It is kind of what pulls the majority of the player base ahead, since it's the most played spec, period, and probably the most simple one in the game at the moment. Small changes to Discipline Priest. Holy Nova mana cost reduced by 75%, was 87%. Okay, I've yet to see a Discipline Priest use Holy Nova so far, but maybe I need to play more Discipline Priest myself. And we're going into the Rogue. This is a big patch for Rogue, by the way. because there are a lot of fixes for a lot of the issues that rogues have been complaining about, particularly for Assassination. But let's go into it. First of all, baseline rogue change. Cold Blood cooldown now begins immediately upon use and has a 15-second max duration. From what I understand with rogue, this is to more align Cold Blood with certain cooldowns and DPS bursts, particularly with Fatebound Assassination. I know that Whisper has just made a video on it, and if you don't know who Whisper is, he is one of the lead theory crafters on Assassination. If there's anything Assassination, you go to him. We're going to have a link to his video down in the description. But going into Assassination for Deathstalker, the 2-set bonus now increases effectiveness of Deathstalker damage effect and bonuses by 60%, previously was 50%. And the 4-set now increases shift duration by 3 seconds, previously was 2 seconds, so big buffs to the tier set. For Deathstalker Subtlety, the 2-set bonus now increases effectiveness of Deathstalker damage effects by 40%, previously was 50%, was way better for sub than it was for Assassination, and fixed an issue that prevented Deathstalker damage events from benefiting from Lingering Darkness effect. For the Fatebound changes, Fatebound coin, tails, and lucky coin damage has been increased by 17%. And for Assassination, fixed an issue that caused Kingsbane ramping damage effects to reset while Kingsbane was still active with the Mana Force 2-set bonus equipped. This, from what I understand, will make Kingsbane a lot better, and losing ramping damage during its duration seems very awful because that's basically what Kingsbane is all about. So with the buff to Fatebound and also this change, it's likely that maybe Assassination will be playing Fatebound if more than before, and definitely more Kingsbane windows. I am a proponent of big Kingsbane damage. Trickster changes for Outlaw. Nimble Flurry bonus to Blade Flurry damage reduced to 20%, was 25%. And for Subtlety, Nimble Flurry percent of ability damage dealt reduced to 60%, previously was 65%. I think this was just buff a few weeks ago, if I recall. Nimble Flurry now deals a matching percent of increased damage while Shadow Blades is active. 20% for PvE, 10% for PvP, but the PvE is probably what we're going to be interested in. And Assassination has had an all damage increase by 4% across the board. Outlaw, an all damage increase by 3.5%. And Killing Spree damage increase by 15%. And Subtlety, all damage increased by 5% also. So Rogue has just been buffed across the board. I know a lot of people have been asking for Rogue changes. Now, I'm not sure if this necessarily fixes all of the stuff, but it's good to know that the damage has been addressed so you can actually confidently play Rogue next season and not feel like you're trolling the group for just being out DPS by a lot of other specs or by most of them. But I don't think that was an issue with Rogue, not from what we've tested so far. But buff is a buff, so take it and love it. And lastly, Warlock for the Hellcard Destruction, Wither damage reduced by 15% and Blackened Soul damage reduced by 5%. However, Chaos Bolt damage has been increased by 20% flat out to most likely address single target damage. Now, we don't have a lot of Warlock practice and experience within the raid context, and the little bit that we've played in the dungeon seems to be doing fine-ish in single target, but I think Destruction could use a little bit more single target damage in Mythic Plus, considering that it's lost the Inferno talent. Now, I am saying Inferno, not Infernal. Inferno being the Rain of Fire buffs where you generate soul shards as Rain of Fire does damage. So because that scaling has been taken away, maybe we're seeing a more focus on single target damage for Destruction, which could be a nice niche to be in now that you've lost your big AoE scaling. Even though AoE for Destruction has been pretty good insofar as we've been able to test it on the PTR. The patch is just around the corner, and as we've been saying for every PTR cycle for weeks and weeks and weeks, don't draw conclusion until you see the actual release of the patch to see how the specs are, and mark my words, we're probably predicting another set of tuning, one more before either the raid starts or just maybe as the patch releases. But you can also look at our meta predictions video that we just have released a couple of days ago with us looking at the logs that people have been doing on the PTR, the dungeons that have been playing, the specs that have been playing with us, the specs that we have been playing, and kind of taking a guess at what the meta will look like for the next season. And maybe you agree and maybe you don't, but if you don't, let us know in the comment section below. Love you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.